Welcome. I'm Michael Swinson, and with me, of course, is Wes Kale. And today we're going to talk about something that every manager and project manager has had the opportunity to wonder, I'm sure, in their career, and that is, how do you know when a project is in trouble? And I got to tell you, Wes, this is one that I've really been looking forward to recording, because I've been on both ends of this continuum. I've been the project manager who's had that sinking feeling in his gut that something's just not going right here. I intuitively knew it, but there were things that I think, certainly after preparing for this, it's like, oh, man, this is going to be good. People are really going to resonate with this one. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I hope so. One of the things we're going to be doing in this podcast is directly facing a very difficult issue. As you said, many folks feel that uncomfortable feeling, the sense of unease that things aren't going quite well, and that's unpleasant. And unfortunately, the natural human tendency is to turn away from that, not to address it, and that is a losing strategy. You need to learn to directly face the problems that you've got. And more often than not, when we don't confront the issues, because we're not sure how. Okay, what do I do in this situation? I don't feel prepared for this, so maybe it'll go away. Maybe I don't look at it. I may just imagine whatever.
I do believe that giving folks the ability, in some cases the actual language, to think about how to face this stuff is exactly what they need.
When you spoke to language, folks sometimes need a language in order to deal with difficult topics. Okay, that's a theme that we'll revisit in other video casts as well, and hopefully here we'll help them with that language issue, specifically language around asking questions. You may have all heard about how a key skill to develop is to be able to ask good questions. You can kind of separate your strong PMs from your weak PMs, strong managers from weak managers, depending upon who asks really good questions. And that's what we're going to use here, is that principle of what questions do I need to ask myself? Okay, what is the language I need to speak in order to bring out whether my project is doing well or not? In this case, we want to pin down whether it's doing poorly so that we can fix it. Okay, something that will address another project. So let's talk about this absence of clarity in a little bit more detail. We've said in earlier video casts that ambiguity is typically not your friend. We mentioned that there are times when ambiguity can be useful, but typically it is not. So when you have this absence of information that tells you nothing, except it raises questions in your mind, or you have too much information that doesn't tell you what you need to know, it creates ambiguity that raises questions in people's mind as to how well we're doing. And that is, as a PM, one of the obstacles you've got to remove, because if you have ambiguity about the status of your project, then you're headed down the path of having a problem.
And there's that whole uncertainty thing and the lack of confidence thing.
Well, that's the next point here. That's the next point here, is that this ambiguity leads to loss of confidence. Okay, so you as a project manager need to understand that dispelling this uncertainty is not only the most urgent task that you have, it's also the most important task you have. You have got to establish a sense of order. You've got to establish that your project is either on track or off track. Because what we're saying here is that the absence of clarity that things are well is by definition the sign that things are not well. So what you need is a way of looking at your project, a way of framing it so that you can see whether you're in trouble or not. And we're going to talk about 4 key measures that we will use in order to assess whether the project is in trouble or not. The first one is 7 simple questions. This is where we get into the ability of asking those good questions that are important to success as a manager or a project manager. Secondly, we're going to look at key controls. Now, there are many controls you're going to have on a project, but there's a few of them that you want to make sure are present and are being used properly. And the third measure we're going to look at is the degree of clarity in status reporting. And here we're talking about the conciseness and the completeness of your status reporting, regardless of the audience you're sending it to. And the final measure we're going to look at is what people are saying. This is actually the least reliable and the most plentiful measure we'll have. And it's one we should not leave alone, but we'll save it for last because it requires you to do a lot of filtering before you know whether you have anything useful or not. But those are the 4 measures we're going to go through. So let's turn, first of all, to the 7 simple questions. The first one is, what is the problem to be solved for the project? As we've talked about in early discussions, with inside Kale Partners, we have this concept of a PTBS, a problem to be solved. And that is our acronym for describing the core objective. Okay, we establish this project to achieve some sort of objective. What is that objective? Make sure we have that clearly understood, so as we move forward, we can use it as a guidepost for us to make sure we stay on track. Well, if you find yourself 2 or 3 months into the project wondering, what is this we're doing here, okay, you can't come back with a very crisp answer that sounds good to you on this, then you have a problem. The second question is the PTBS, the problem to be solved, the core objective, is it broadly understood? And when we say broadly here,
I was just going to say, what do you mean by broadly?
It can be defined many different ways, but the bottom line is after your PTBS has been defined, you're going to engage a larger community of interest, and there's going to be a stakeholder community that's actively involved in the project. They need to understand what is the problem they're trying to solve here. Okay, and you're going to have 1 or 2 people who may forget, be reminded, whatever, and there are going to be folks who are out in the call centers or out in the development shops who may not be quite tied into why they're doing things they're doing, and that's okay. But among the folks who are influential in the project, okay, your immediate stakeholders and their supporting staff, they need to have a good understanding of what that problem is always. And if you're not comfortable that there's clarity amongst the stakeholder community about what this project is for, that too is a problem. Now, if you are ambiguous or unclear about 2 or more of these, then by definition you are in trouble. So this very first measure, if you've gone through this list of 7 things and you've come up with, well, I'm not sure, I'll come back to that one later on, or no, I'm not doing that, and you have 2 or more of these questions that you have those responses to, you have a problem. You don't even need to go on the other 3 measures. You have a problem right now that you need to get done.
And folks, don't try to rationalize this.
Right.
I love the way Covey talks about it's rational lies.
Okay, so let's move on to the second measure. Okay, the second measure is the absence of key controls. Okay, now first of all, I want to clarify that when you are late on a project, or you're over budget, or you have a bunch of problems, that doesn't necessarily mean you're out of control, because you actually know what the problem is. Okay. It's only when you really don't have a handle on it, or the rate at which any of these is occurring is out of control, that you have the problem. Okay? So what do we mean when we say out of control? Well, we mean basically these 3 points. First of all, there's no standard of what under control means. So let's look at the key controls that we believe you should have in order to determine that a project is under control. The first one is, does the organization itself, the parent organization, have a project methodology? If it does not have a project methodology, then you're doing the best you can. If you have 5 PMs, you may have 5 different methodologies. Okay, that is a problem. Secondly, does the project have a schedule? If you haven't developed a schedule for a project, you have a problem. Okay, that's a key control that is missing. Third key control, public status report. If there's no public status report, that is a problem. Fourth, is there a current budget for the project? Okay, notice I say current budget, not just a budget for the project, because typically most organizations go through an annual budgeting exercise where they establish a projection of what will be spent in the coming year for this project.
So that's like earmarking.
That's correct. Yeah. Earmarked dollars. And
that's not what we're talking about.
No, we're talking about after you have. And finally, if your project doesn't have a change control mechanism, that is a problem. So if you look at these key controls, okay,
and sometimes that last one's related to the first one, because that's sometimes covered in the project methodology.
It should.
Yeah.
It should. I've seen some project methodologies that leave it out deliberately because they don't want to run afoul of IT's change control process that is often targeted at operational issues, like when they migrate software into production, stuff like that. And they use the same terms to describe the same thing. But you're right. So the methodology should have some mechanism for dealing with change. Okay.
Yeah.
So
at a minimum, it should say, have a method for dealing with change.
Have a method. That's right. Okay, so these are the 5 key controls. If you're missing any of these, if you're missing a single one, you have a problem. Okay?